how to start a market garden and should you. For those who don't know, a market garden is a small vegetable garden, relatively small compared to industrial agriculture, but still can be a lot bigger than a backyard garden. It can grow food for a lot of people, but these type of annual vegetable crops where you're growing a diversity of annual vegetable crops, you don't need that much space. You're selling it in a CSA format, a farmer's market format, weekly deliveries, weekly pickup, however you want to do it. You could make something out of it, doesn't matter. You're growing these vegetables and selling them. And how to do that, how I did it for 2 years, and should you do it. And ultimately, I'm going to be making a 23-part, that's the outline right now, but YouTube series over the next however long it takes about the food forest installation business that I started a couple months ago. So what I'm doing now is not this, I'm installing food forests. And you can check that out at eternal.harvest on Instagram. But just to give a little background, we're going to cover this. And so if you have any interest in creating a food forest business or a market garden where you're selling vegetables, watch this video. I'm just going to be covering the market garden and why I decided not to do it, but why you might want to do it, just outlining why you might want to do it and what that looks like and how I did it. So I'll just start at the end and then we're going to go through that. The reason that I decided not to do it is because I didn't want to be tied down to a singular location, and because this is the type of business model that's going to take many years to pay off. And then ultimately, when it does pay off, you're pretty limited in the amount of money you're going to make selling these vegetables unless you scale up and hire other people. For me, I want to do something that's passion related, that's an art form. Sure, owning a big farm where you're actually farming sustainably and creating healthy produce is a good thing, and it's not a terrible idea to make a business out of it where you hire their people, but then I'm not paying them well. I just want to be involved in what I'm doing. So there's only so much money you can make from it. It takes a while for it to pay off, and you're stuck in one location. I'm pretty young. I'm 23. I started this when I was like 20, 21. This 2-year project I did, and I'm not ready to be tied to a location like that. And so I'm going to tell you why basically what I'm doing now is much better for me, but that's not what this video is about. This is probably the worst way to start this video because I just told you every reason you shouldn't do this. If you know where you're going to be living for a while, you can actually start a market garden and do it on the side. You can just grow a huge garden. You might want to live somewhere out in the country. There's many lifestyles this is very compatible with. When I did it, I was driving an hour to go to this garden. This isn't something in my backyard I could just, put a tarp down and kill the weeds and then start planting next year. This is something that was a big time and money investment for me. So that's why you might not want to do it, but everything else about it is amazing. A market garden is really cool. There's a lot of good things about it. You're getting to go meet a lot of people that you're selling it to and just give people healthy food. And you can grow it really well. I grew it with no chemicals whatsoever, super fertile soil. You can do a market garden really, really well in a way that's great for the environment and great for people's health. And I think if you market that, like let's say you make some sauerkraut out of it, it's like this superfood with this amazing quality cabbage that's fermented. You can make a pretty profitable product out of it, but still you're just kind of limited. And it's not necessarily that you need to be making a bunch of money doing this. You can make a living doing it and have a job that you really, really enjoy if you're going to be living somewhere that is compatible with this lifestyle. So yeah, it's a great thing to do. Let me just tell you how I did it, and that's going to kind of paint more of a picture of what this is going to look like. So what I would recommend you do is think about where you're going to live. If you're going to be doing this, you can do what I did, which is do a small bet. Cal Newport calls it a small bet, when you just do a project for a while to see if it's a good idea for you. So I did this for 2 years. That's a pretty big, small bet. You could do that. Or if you just want to go for it, it's compatible with your lifestyle. You have a 1/4 acre in your yard and you're going to be living there for a while, then just go for it. There's not a big downside. What I did, because I was doing it as a small bet, is that I found some local farmers who I had already been buying beef from because they do really well regenerative Joel Salatin style beef. I've been buying their beef for years. I just asked them if I could borrow some land. And if you're in this really sustainable, really healthy agricultural community, people want to help each other. They were super gracious. They allowed me to borrow their land for free, use their cow manure compost, and well water. So right there, I had the land and all the ingredients for really healthy soil off the bat. So I borrowed their land, ran the experiment, and had very low expenses just doing this little experiment. The thing is, when you're creating that really healthy soil, you're investing in the land. And so obviously I was not hurting their land. I was helping their land, spreading a bunch of compost and stuff. And also just killing the weeds is a big investment for a market garden. That's a big part of it, is getting rid of the weeds before you plant. You can't just like, oh, let me plant and then go weed the garden at scale. That's just not going to work. You need to have something ahead of time that takes care of weeds. That's not something you can worry about last minute. And so we'll talk about that. I'll go through my system for establishing a market garden that I used. I have a bunch of books here. I'll get into that in a second. But what we're talking about now is like with your lifestyle, you can think about, is this market garden something that's compatible? Don't expect that you're going to do what I did, just drive an hour for a couple years and make a bunch of money off of it. I would expect it to take a while for it to be profitable. You have to build a customer base. You have to build a system of distribution, all while not really knowing how to farm unless you've done this exact thing before. You're going to run into errors. You're going to mess up some crops. And so there's just so many variables going on that it's a system you need to work on for a couple years before it really gets profitable. So that's why it's such a good thing to just do on the side in your backyard at a small scale, because it takes a really low amount of input. If you have time and it's right there, you can do this with pretty low input. Just work on it a little bit. And yeah. So that pretty much covers why you might want to do it, what kind of lifestyles it's compatible with. I'm going to just tell you how to do it. I told you how you might want to access land. Ideally, you have land that you live on. It's just so much better if you live there. What I would recommend doing if you're going to be establishing a market garden is tarping the land. So you can till the land. Tilling isn't good for the soil. And it doesn't even kill all the weeds to establish a garden. Whatever is growing there, there's something growing there you're going to want to get rid of, I'm sure. Use a UV 8mm silage black and white polyurethane silage tarp and black on top. Leave it there for an entire season, spring to fall. That's going to kill everything underneath. There's really no other way to do it, because you till it, all the weed roots are still there. You don't want to be fighting against these weeds. You don't want to be spraying some kind of terrible herbicide and then waiting for that to wear off, and that's just terrible anyways. Tilling isn't going to kill everything. It's bad for the soil. So you're going to want to do the silage tarp. This isn't something you can just jump into. I didn't do that my first year. I ended up spending like 60 hours a week weeding the garden. So you don't want to do that. You want to establish it. You want to have time to do that. Once you do that, it's as simple as finding a quality source of compost. I gave you my example. Whatever it is, you can buy bulk compost by the yard. You might just have to invest in bulk compost delivery. There is a big variety and qualities of compost. Try and, if you're in a decent sized city, find a good compost source. Something where the materials that they're making the compost out of are clean. They're not full of chemicals. A lot of these composts is just city bins that people put their stuff in their compost bins. There's produce stickers. There's all kinds of nonsense. You want something that's coming from a clean source, ideally even organic vegetables or things that aren't too high in pesticides. A really good source of compost is manure and some kind of carbon, so like wood chips and cow poop, for example. However, you can, if like what I did, those cows, that cow poop was really high quality. So there's no pesticide residues, really. They were growing all their own hay for winter on the land and weren't using any chemicals. So pesticide residues, herbicide residues, these are things that you would get in some kind of cow manure. Horse manure is really good. Cow manure has some salt in it, so it's fine for a one-time use, but over time, you don't want to put too much salt in the soil or stuff's going to stop growing well. So if you can find some horse manure from a place where they're not being exposed to chemicals, that's great. But ultimately, any kind of manure, once it's gone through the system of the animal, if it's clean manure with some kind of clean carbonaceous material, it's pretty good. I wouldn't worry too terribly much. You want to avoid heavy metal contamination, because that's not something that's going to degrade. Any kind of PFAS, but you don't really have to worry about that too much with compost. So yeah, you want to tarp it, kill this stuff. And we're going to cover everything here, from how to actually establish the garden and then just how to build the business. So this is just like how to start the garden, and maybe we'll go a little bit more at the end back into once you have that context, if you might want to do it or not. So as we wrap up, I don't know if we're wrapping up, but as we get into actually physically gardening, you are going to need a couple books. So I'm just going to pull these books out here as I talk. I think I have them all here. Just show them to you. And this is going to be gold. if you're interested in this, but I'm just going to describe the system while I hold up these books so you can take a screenshot of the book, and I'm just going to keep talking about the system. So you put the tarp down, you put the compost down, you're going to do 30-inch rows. This is probably the best book, The Market Gardener. 30-inch rows, 18-inch pathways. So yeah, definitely get this book. And this is just like a lot of people who are into like permaculture and all this stuff. They want to do all these fancy natural designed pathways and stuff, and that's beautiful. That's great, especially for a food forest. But for annual market gardening, we're going to be doing a lot of tools that are compatible with 30-inch rows. These tools allow you to grow organically, to grow sustainably. This book is kind of mid. Yeah, this is for, you don't need the wrong book. It's not for market gardening. But for market gardening, there's a couple more books. I'm going to pull up right here. Let's see. Yeah, I got them. I'm just going to keep it pretty simple. So yeah, this is a class. This is Jesse Frost. Really good stuff. This and that other book, exactly what I'm talking about here. And then Elliot Coleman is a classic one. I think he even was one of the first people that got those 30-inch rows to be standardized for a lot of these tools. And I wish I was in the room where I had these tools right now so I could show them to you. But you can pull up a picture, and I'll recommend you pull up a picture of these tools. So we've got the Tilther, Tilther. It attaches to a drill and is going to till the top 2 inches of soil or even 1 inch. And tilling is bad for the soil. You're going to find out about that in these books. If you don't already know that, hopefully you already do. That's not what this video is about, but you're not going to want to till soil. It's just not compatible with ecological farming, where you're building a healthy soil food web and a healthy whole entire ecosystem as the foundation of your farming system. And I know I just said I'm not going to talk about it, but I can't help myself. It's basically like a hurricane, a tornado, an earthquake, all this stuff combined. It rips up all the fungal hyphae. It destroys the soil. So the thing with the Tilther is you're just getting that top layer of soil to prepare a seed bed to plant into. Sometimes you just need a little fluffed up top layer to plant into, and all the soil below the food web is fine. So that's not a big deal. The reason people till deep down is because it aerates the soil, but we're aerating the soil with earthworms, organic matter, ecology over time, so you don't need to do something every year to prop up the aeration. Tilling, and pretty much every intervention from industrial agriculture, makes it so that you're dependent on that intervention. Every time you till, you destroy the soil. Next year, it's more compacted and needs more tilling. You kill the pest with pesticides, basically wipes out the pest. The predators of those pests also get wiped out. And because of that, then you're dependent on that pesticide. You need to use it again. So, till the soil. So you've got your tarp soil. The weeds are all killed. You've got this flat dirt, which is relatively compacted. And you've put some compost on. You're going to want to broad fork the soil. You take a fork, literally just a giant fork, Google broad fork. You can't just use a usual pitchfork. These things are heavy duty. A broad fork, it goes in, you stand on it, and you pull it back. Open up the air passages into the soil. And instead of blending the soil, it's like, this is the soil, instead of putting it in a blender, you're putting a fork into it and opening it up a little bit. So the tarping will compact it a little bit. Just broad forking helps get that oxygen into the soil in a good balance that's going to support microbiological activity without just burning through all the soil nutrients, and give those roots aerated or a little bit of fluff to get into. So you're doing that every like foot or two to prop up the soil. After a few years of building soil, you're not going to need to broad fork eventually. And it'll become much easier. Initially, it might be like, wow, every time is so hard to get the fork in to pull it back. Every year, it's going to get much easier. This is an investment in the long-term health of the soil. So you're broad forking for down below. You're tilting to make a good planting seed bed. You can get a Jane and invest in a Jane. You definitely need a Jane, Jang. You can get the Earthway seeder if you're really on a budget, but get a Jane JP1 seeder with different rollers. This is a seeder. This is something with wheels. Wheel goes, it digs a little trench, plucks the seed down, spaced apart, covers it up, and then smooths it down a little bit. So you're just planting, you're saving yourself hours of time every time you're planting seeds, and you're getting them in at the right depth and the right spacing. So, yeah, those are the tools you're going to need to get rid of weeds, create healthy soil, And yeah, you're doing the compost and then the broad fork so that some of the compost falls into the holes of that broad fork, gets down in there. And then you're going to tilth up the surface, seed with the seeder, and have some transplants that you can just get into that fluffed up soil as well. Certain crops, you might do a mulch. So you have tomatoes, you're going to do a mulch that will decompose within the year, but that will keep weeds away, keep dirt from splashing up, and not getting, rainwater on plain dirt. That's not good for soil. It just washes it away, creates a compaction layer. But a little bit of mulch, like leaves or whatever, is great. Or for walkways too, there's different ways to do walkways. You can do living walkways, but then you have to maintain it from going into the path. I don't think that's a good idea unless you really know what you're doing. You can do a mulch garden with a lot of crops, with like wood chips even. There's different ways to do it, but that's kind of the general outline for how to start a market garden. And you can see that system there is just going to create healthy soil because you're not having to do all these things to keep the weeds at bay, to add fertility. You just keep adding compost. The soil ecosystem gets better and better based on the nutrients that are there. Their roots are forming symbiotic relationships with bacteria and fungi. And over time, just improving the soil. We're not having to do anything to disturb it. And we're getting the weeds taken care of, fertility, pest management. I would recommend doing strips of native wildflowers, pollinator stuff, strips throughout the garden, and do a huge area of native wildflowers. If you're establishing something, say under 1,000 square feet, it might be worth it to put down a layer of cardboard or cardboard paper, 6 inches of wood chips, or 4 inches, and then plant transplants of native flowers into that in order to establish a native flower garden. However, if you're doing an area larger than that, it's just going to make sense, and it's always going to be cheaper to just put a tarp down, the silage tarp, and kill the weeds for a full season, and then plant seeds in the spring or the fall of native wildflowers and make sure they are well watered in the spring. And you want a big area of this to support the population of these pollinators and also predators of pests, such as parasitoid wasps. And so then you're going to have these rows of flowers in the garden. And because the predators of those pests are going to those rows in the garden, they're passing over every area of your garden. And so support the populations of these predators of pests, spiders, like mulch, just leaves left over the winter, undisturbed soil. Every pest population is going to come into balance when you focus on ecology. Of course, there's an exception. If there's a giant agricultural field next to you that's overrun with pests because it's monoculture and it's just this breeding ground of a certain pest, that might be an issue. You're going to have to deal with that. But the diversity in your market. So 30-inch rows, I would do 15-inch one crop, 15-inch another crop, just because I really wanted to do diversity. I would do 25 feet of that crop, sometimes 50. No, I think I always did 25, actually, instead of doing 100 feet of a crop. So just all these chunks in these rows. And my garden was like, I don't remember, like 200 feet or something long, and then 40 feet wide. Is that right? 200 by 40, it was like 10,000. So I think it was like 250 by 40 or 250 by 50. It was like a quarter acre, so more than 10,000. So yeah, a quarter acre was a lot. You don't need to start with a 16th of an acre. If you're growing a garden properly, these things are productive. Every little row is going to be producing so much. If they're succeeding. I had a lot of crops that just didn't grow well. For various reasons, not that they didn't grow well, but they could have been a lot more productive. Like carrots. If you're learning to grow carrots, you got to really do a good job, so that they get big. If they just like are a month behind because of a couple things that weren't ideal, these carrots are going to not be as big. So just start small, get your yields right, because a quarter acre garden is a massive amount of work. So the pest control, I didn't need to use any chemicals in my garden. I probably lost about 15-20% of my crops to pest failure. I mean, I don't know if I really lost anything. There's just maybe even less. Like it was fine, and that's not a big deal. Like would just plant more. Like you're putting these seeds down. There's no weeds. It can be so, when you build these systems, it's so amazing how low maintenance these gardens are. It's beautiful. No weeds. Tools handle everything. These amazing tools put the seeds in, prepare the bed, and then you just water it, and then it just grows. There's no weeds, just a whole row of carrots, a whole row of lettuce. One more tool, it's the Quick Cut Greens Harvester. You're going to want this for harvesting greens. Basically has a blade, and you can just harvest a whole bed of greens, and it scoops it into a bucket like 10 times faster than you would with knives. And these things, like, you might think like, wow, you want me to spend $2,500 on all these tools? And yeah, like, it's just going to save you so much time. And the earlier you get it, the more time you're going to save. And like, yeah, time is money, but also just time is time. So, you know, it's going to be very efficient. You can start off with the broad fork is essential. The tilther, it's not as essential. If you have a good layer of compost, you can just fluff it up with a rake. And the seeder isn't as essential. You can throw seeds down if you want pretty quickly. You can just plant them. And the Quick Cut Greens Harvester isn't essential, but the broad fork you definitely need. I'd say the tilther, like, maybe get that one next, and maybe then the seeder and then the harvester, in that order, if you can't get them all. But yeah, there's going to be some situations where like you're like, man, I wish I had the tilther. But yeah, you could, there's also just your philosophy. If you just want to start really small, the smaller the scale, the less the tools make sense. So yeah, that's all you're going to need. That's basically the system. Look at those books. If you're interested in this, those books will lay out the system. The idea of this isn't to give you a full comprehensive guide. If you're actually going to do this, you need those books, but it will give you an idea if you want to read those books. So that's what the system looks like. You plant the plants, you harvest the stuff, you take care of them. You're going to need to learn gardening, of course. This is not going to just magically, but this is like the underlying framework of healthy soil, pest balance. So we covered weeds, pest balance, fertility. What's the other thing I think about sometimes? Weeding. Yeah, that's it. So, yeah, just a little bit more about this framework to understand the reason people make chemical interventions in industrial agriculture is because there's an ecological niche that is not being filled within the system. And so what does that mean? We're using fertilizers because the system isn't producing fertility. In a perfect permaculture food forest system, you have plants that are producing fertility, animals that are pooping and stuff. In this system, we're using a more organic input, compost. And over time, you're not even going to need to add as much compost. So over time, the need for it goes down. In industrial agriculture, over time, the need for it goes up. Why? Because you're depleting the soil every year. It gets worse and worse. In 60 years, and I mean, who knows, but it's likely that a lot of industrial agriculture soil won't be able to be propped up by standard NPK fertilizers because they're so depleted in everything else that's essential, like minerals and everything. So yeah, the next example would be pests. So we're using the pesticide to intervene in the ecosystem. That role should be filled by the predators of those pests, and those pests shouldn't be able to just multiply so quick because there should be a diversity of plants. So yeah, those are examples. That's why we're building this system. It's not a perfect ecosystem. Market gardens are still a little man-made, but the way that I'm describing it to you is a lot. You're going to be growing food that's way healthier than a lot of the stuff you would find in a farmer's market. Not a lot of people are doing it like this with no tillage, with no pesticide intervention. This is really a very ecological approach. So this isn't just your typical garden. It sounds really simple. And it's just like, oh, you're using this tool. Why is it? But it's like this whole system allows you to do things really environmentally friendly, really ecologically, and grow the healthiest food by doing that. So that's basically how you build the garden. The books will tell you the rest. Now, should you do this? 100%. In some context, at some point in your life. I'm pretty young. At some point in my life, I'll probably settle down on some property somewhere and definitely have this type of garden system going so that I can grow a lot of food for myself. However, it just, I guess we already covered it. Like, you just think about, like, really think about your life, really audit it. Like, and this is something that I realized after doing it. I don't regret what I did at all. It was great. I learned so much. And I absolutely love doing this. But if you're kind of on the fence, just do it a little bit and you'll learn from that. But I definitely think that these type of gardens need to be everywhere. This system is absolutely amazing. So the rest of this video series is going to be covering what I do now. Basically a food forest. And I'll just pull out a book, because why not? A food forest, this is a really good, it's a 2-volume series, is a much closer biomimicry of a natural ecosystem. So a food forest looks a lot more like a natural forest than a garden would, but doesn't mean these gardens are bad. So what I'm doing is installing these food forests in people's yards. And that's a great way to have this instead of all these local farms, or not instead of, but just like we have all these, want to have all these local farms doing this type of market gardening. People should have fruit trees, fruit bushes, native wildflowers, all these perennial plants that come up year after year and are low maintenance or zero maintenance in their yards, growing everywhere, in schools, in, I don't know, churches, I don't know, whatever organizations, just everywhere, all over, these things should be growing. And yeah, these systems are even lower maintenance. Unlike the garden, you're still having to weed. You still have to weed in a food forest, but ideally, eventually you don't. In a market garden, you still have to weed. You do have to add some compost. You do have to plant and harvest. You have to harvest anything, but you have to plant every year. And yeah, so I do food forests now. We're going to be talking about that in the rest of the series. Subscribe if you want to hear about that. But what I would say is that also, yeah, my business, I haven't done it yet. I've just been focusing on the food forest. I started this 4 years ago, but I would like to install these gardens. These type I'm talking about in this video, they're really great. I'd love to help people build them and install them and guide them through that. That's something I'd like to do eventually, is to get those everywhere. Like, imagine if a school had just like a little row crop garden. That would be really great. It's a lot better than like a raised garden bed, all these different systems. You can just grow a lot more food in them, and you could actually like grow all the food for a school, or all the vegetables that a school is eating in a system like this really cheaply, with very little labor. Once this system is established, it runs really smoothly. And so, yeah, that's how you start these systems. Oh yeah, one thing to talk about, the business side of it. So you have all these vegetables, you need to get clients, you need to develop systems of distribution. So if you are starting small, a farmer's market can be a risky bet. You have to pay money to go into the farmer's market, and you don't know how many vegetables you will actually have to sell. If you do this really well, if you've killed all the weeds before, I think you can, if you know gardening, you can expect to have a certain amount. If you can find a cheap farmer's market booth, I would recommend that, because then you can just get your stand set up, get it looking nice, because the farmer's market handles so much. It's such a good system. I never did that. I went and found all my clients myself, which took a lot of time. I went door to door. I handed out flyers. I texted people. I put up bulletin boards. I never did any paid marketing, but it was just a lot of time. And I never really had enough clients. I was always like, man, I need like 5-10 more clients this week. And then sometimes I would get them, sometimes I wouldn't. And overall, I had like 90 clients, maybe 25 would order a week. And I would do weekly deliveries and pickup. And I would end up doing like 8 hours of just delivering on delivery day, which is quite the hassle. You need to go harvest all your stuff either the night before and then put it in a fridge. But at this scale, you don't have enough fridge space. You have to build a giant cold room with electricity and air and free and coolers or whatever makes it a fridge. That's a big thing that you would do eventually, but that's really expensive up front when you're starting. So I would harvest early in the morning, go deliver all day. It was just a nightmare to try and do that all in time. So you can sell to restaurants. I never did that myself, but a lot of people say that's a good way to do it. Restaurants that care about quality. But yeah, I would honestly recommend starting with a farmer's market if you can. However, if you are at a really smaller scale where the farmer's market maybe doesn't make sense, that's less customers that you need to go find. If you do want to go find customers, that is something you can do. You can create flyers, go door to door. You could do any kind of marketing. Go research marketing. You could do email marketing. You could put up flyers, bulletin boards. There's so many ways to do that. And yeah, so then you go harvest the vegetables. You're going to want to deliver them probably the day of, unless you have a lot of space to store them. Some vegetables can stay overnight wherever and be fine. And then you go sell them. And that's a whole side of it. In my Food Forest series, I'm going to be covering a lot of like here's the video on how to do the bank accounts, on the LLC, on everything you need to know. And a lot of that stuff would apply to this type of business as well. So stay tuned for that if that interests you. But yeah, I think I'll wrap it up here. Call that a video. subscribe, like, leave a comment. If you've watched to this point, no reason not to leave a comment. Any question you have, I will make a video on. Yeah, thank you. Peace.